The sound of a pistol cocking echoed through the small wooden shack as Katherine Forrester aimed her dead husband's revolver at the door, her trembling hands betraying her fear despite her resolute expression. "I told you yesterday, Mr. Higgins, you'll have to kill me before I leave my home," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt as heavy footsteps approached her front porch in the pale light of dawn. It was April 1883 in Miles City, Montana, and Katherine had been a widow for exactly 3 months. The bitter winter had finally released its grip on the land, leaving behind mud and new grass. But spring had brought no relief to her circumstances, only the final notice of eviction that had been nailed to her door 2 days prior. "Mrs. Forrester, I've got 6 men with me today," Thomas Higgins' nasal voice called through the door. "The bank's orders are final. This property's been sold, and you're trespassing now." Katherine's dark auburn hair hung loose around her shoulders, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. At 26, she had already experienced more loss than most women twice her age. Her husband James had been a good man, not perfect by any means, but decent. His death from pneumonia after falling through river ice had been sudden and devastating. What came as an even greater shock was learning he had mortgaged their small home to invest in a mining venture that had yielded nothing but debt. "I just need more time," she called back, knowing her words were futile. She'd been pleading for weeks. The door suddenly splintered under the force of an axe, and Katherine stumbled backward, the gun wavering in her hands as she faced the bank agent and his men. Higgins was a thin, rat-faced man who seemed to take a particular pleasure in carrying out evictions. "Time's up, Mrs. Forrester," he said with a smirk, gesturing for his men to enter. "You can leave with dignity or be dragged out." Katherine's finger tightened on the trigger, but even in her desperation, she knew she couldn't shoot these men. James had taught her to use the revolver for protection, but he'd also taught her that taking a life was no small thing. With a shuddering breath, she lowered the weapon. "At least let me gather my things," she said, her voice hollow. Higgins checked his pocket watch. "You have 15 minutes. The next quarter hour passed in a blur as Katherine frantically stuffed clothing, a few keepsakes, and her wedding band into a worn carpetbag. The men began removing furniture before she was even finished, carrying out the table James had built with his own hands, the rocking chair where she had dreamed of nursing children who would never be born now. When they reached for her mother's china teapot, the only thing she had left from her childhood home in Boston, Katherine lunged forward, snatching it from a worker's hands. "This isn't part of the property," she snapped, carefully wrapping it in a shawl and placing it in her bag. At precisely 15 minutes, Higgins grabbed her arm and marched her outside to the muddy street. The spring air held a chill that cut through her thin dress as she stood watching the workers empty her home. Neighbors peered from windows and doorways, but none approached. Times were hard for everyone in Miles City. "Where am I supposed to go?" Katherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Higgins shrugged. "Not my concern, madam. You might try the church, or there's always Widow Morgan's boarding house, though I hear she requires payment up front." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy before returning to oversee the removal of her possessions. Katherine stood rooted to the spot, the carpetbag clutched in her hands, her husband's revolver hidden beneath her shawl. The weight of her situation pressed down upon her like a physical force. She had exactly $2.73 to her name, not enough for a train ticket back east, not enough for more than perhaps 2 nights at the cheapest boarding house. She had no family left. Her parents had died years ago, and she had no siblings. James had been her entire world, and now that world was gone. Katherine walked away from her home without looking back, her chin held high despite the tears streaming down her face. She made her way to the church first, hoping to find Pastor Williams, but the church was locked, the pastor away visiting parishioners in the outlying homesteads. By midday, she had exhausted her limited options. Widow Morgan's boarding house was indeed full, as were the other 2 establishments in town that might have taken her in. The saloon owner had offered her a position, his lecherous gaze making clear what kind of work he meant. She had left immediately, face burning with humiliation. With nowhere else to go, Katherine found herself sitting on a bench outside the general store, considering her options. The sun was beginning its descent, and with night would come the danger of being a woman alone on the streets. She could try to make it to the next town, but that was 30 miles away, an impossible journey on foot. "Excuse me, madam. You look like you could use some help." Katherine looked up to find a tall man standing before her. His face was tanned and weathered beneath a wide-brimmed hat, his clothes dusty from the road. He wasn't from Miles City, she would have recognized him, but there was something reassuring about his steady blue eyes. "I'm fine, thank you," she said automatically, the social graces of her Boston upbringing taking over despite her desperate circumstances. He raised an eyebrow, taking in her reddened eyes and the carpetbag at her feet. "Forgive my boldness, but you don't look fine. I'm Fletcher Sheridan. I own a ranch about 10 miles outside of town." He removed his hat, revealing dark blonde hair that curled slightly at the edges. Katherine hesitated. A woman alone could not be too careful, especially with strangers. But there was something open and honest in his expression that made her reluctantly introduce herself. "Katherine Forrester. Mrs. Katherine Forrester," she added, emphasizing her married status even though it no longer offered the protection it once had. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Forrester. I couldn't help overhearing some talk at the Mercantile about a widow being evicted this morning. Would that be you?" Heat rose to Katherine's cheeks, so she was already the subject of town gossip. "Yes," she admitted. "My husband died this winter. The bank foreclosed on our home." Fletcher nodded thoughtfully, settling his hat back on his head. "I'm sorry for your loss, madam. I lost my wife about 5 years back. Know something about starting over." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "I don't mean to be forward, and I'll understand if you take offense, but I've got a proposition for you." Katherine stiffened, ready to walk away if this was going to be another indecent proposal. Seeing her reaction, Fletcher quickly added, "A business proposition, Mrs. Forrester." "Nothing untoward." He cleared his throat. "My ranch has been doing well enough, cattle mostly, some horses, but the place hasn't had a woman's touch since my Sarah passed. I've been looking for someone to help manage the household. You're offering me employment?" Katherine asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Room and board plus wages," Fletcher confirmed. "It's honest work, Mrs. Forrester. Cooking, cleaning, maybe helping with the accounts if you've got a head for numbers. I've got 2 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, and my 10-year-old son, William." Katherine studied him, trying to determine if there was any deception in his offer. He was handsome in a rugged way, perhaps 35 years old, with laugh lines around his eyes despite the serious set of his mouth. His hands were calloused, his stance confident but not threatening. "Why would you offer this to a complete stranger?" she asked suspiciously. Fletcher smiled slightly. "I need help, you need work, and truth be told, my boy needs a woman's influence. He's been running wild since his mother died. The last housekeeper I hired lasted all of 2 weeks before William's antics drove her to quit." He looked down at his boots for a moment. "I'm not asking you to be his mother, just to bring some order back to my home." Katherine considered her limited options. Night was approaching and she had nowhere to go. This man was offering her shelter, work, and a chance to preserve her dignity. I would need to know more about the position, she said cautiously. The exact nature of my duties, the hours, the wages. Fair enough, Fletcher nodded. I'm staying at the hotel tonight. Why don't you join me for supper in the dining room public place? Plenty of witnesses and we can discuss the details. Whatever you decide, I'll pay for a room for you tonight so you have a safe place to sleep. Katherine wanted to refuse his charity, but pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Thank you, Mr. Sheridan. That's very generous. Fletcher, please, he said, offering his arm in a gentlemanly gesture that surprised her. Shall we, Mrs. Forrester? Katherine, she replied, taking his arm hesitantly. As they walked toward the hotel, she felt the curious stares of townspeople who had ignored her plight earlier that day. Let them stare, she thought defiantly. She had survived the worst day of her life since James's death, and she would continue to survive. The hotel dining room was modestly elegant by Miles City standards, with actual tablecloths and glass oil lamps casting a warm glow over the handful of patrons. Fletcher requested a table near the center of the room, Katherine noted with approval. He was being careful to ensure their meeting appeared proper. Once they were seated, Fletcher ordered coffee and the evening special for both of them, then turned his attention to Katherine. I should tell you more about the ranch, he began. It's called the Lazy S. Not the biggest spread in the territory, but respectable, about 5,000 acres. The house is 2 stories, built it myself after I came out here from Pennsylvania in '68. 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, even glass windows. There was a touch of pride in his voice. It's comfortable, though it needs a woman's attention to make it properly livable again. Katherine sipped her coffee, trying not to appear too eager at the thought of a real house with glass windows. And my duties would include cooking for me, my son, and occasionally the hands when they're not out with the herd, keeping the house in order, laundry, mending. You'd have Sundays to yourself, and I'd drive you to town for church if you wish. He paused as their meals arrived, beef stew with dumplings that made Katherine realize how hungry she was. As for wages, Fletcher continued after the server departed, I can offer $15 a month, plus room and board. Your own bedroom with a lock on the door, he added, clearly wanting to reassure her about her safety and privacy. It was a fair offer, better than fair, considering her desperate circumstances. The salary would allow her to save, perhaps eventually afford passage back east where she might find work as a teacher or companion. What about your son? Katherine asked. You mentioned he's been difficult. A shadow crossed Fletcher's face. William is a good boy at heart. But he's angry about losing his mother, and I haven't known how to help him through it. I'm gone from sunup to sundown most days, working the ranch. He's been left to his own devices too much. He met her eyes directly. I won't lie to you, he may not welcome you at first. But I believe having a steady female presence would be good for him. Katherine considered his words carefully. She had always wanted children, had dreamed of having a family with James. Though this would be a temporary arrangement, perhaps caring for a child, even a difficult one, would fill some of the emptiness in her heart. I should tell you, Mr. Sheridan, Fletcher, he reminded her gently. Fletcher, she amended. I have limited experience as a housekeeper. I can cook well enough and I'm tidy by nature, but my husband and I lived simply. Can you make bread that won't break a man's tooth? Coffee that doesn't taste like mud? Stew meat until it's tender? When she nodded, Fletcher smiled. Then you're already an improvement over my current situation. I've been doing the cooking myself, and according to my ranch hands, I have a special talent for burning everything I touch. Despite herself, Katherine smiled back. His self-deprecating humor was disarming. There's one more thing you should know, she said, setting down her fork. I'm with child." The words hung in the air between them. Katherine had only confirmed her suspicion the week before, after missing her monthly courses for the second time. James's last gift to her, a child who would never know its father. Fletcher's expression remained neutral, though his eyes widened slightly. "I see," he said after a moment. "How far along are you?" "About 2 months, I believe. The child will come in late October or early November." He nodded slowly. "Will you be able to perform your duties until then?" "Yes," Katherine said firmly. "I'm healthy and strong. My mother worked in our family store until the day before I was born." Fletcher took a drink of his coffee, seemingly in thought. "The offer stands, Katherine. In fact, having a baby at the ranch might be good for William. Give him someone to look after, teach him some responsibility." He hesitated. "But I want to be clear about expectations. This is still a business arrangement. I'm not looking for a wife, and I don't expect you to stay permanently. Once the baby comes, you might want to make other arrangements." His honesty was both refreshing and slightly disappointing, though Katherine couldn't articulate why. "I understand completely. I appreciate your willingness to accommodate my situation. Then we have an agreement." Fletcher extended his hand across the table. Katherine hesitated only briefly before shaking it, his large hand engulfing her smaller one. "We do, Mr. Fletcher. I accept your offer of employment." "Good," he smiled, releasing her hand. "We'll leave for the ranch tomorrow morning. I have a wagon outside of town with supplies." "Do you have everything you need for tonight?" Katherine glanced at her meager carpet bag. "This is all I have left." Something flashed in Fletcher's eyes, anger perhaps, though not directed at her. "The bank took everything, most of it. I saved what I could carry." Fletcher nodded, his jaw tight. "We'll get you sorted out. The general store opens at 7. I'll meet you in the hotel lobby at 6:30, get you some essentials before we head out." After finishing their meal, Fletcher escorted her to the front desk and arranged for a room. Katherine felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension as she climbed the stairs to her accommodations. She had avoided spending the night on the streets, but tomorrow she would be traveling to an isolated ranch with a man she had just met. Yet something about Fletcher Sheridan inspired trust. Perhaps it was the straightforward way he spoke, or the fact that he had been so respectful of her boundaries. Or maybe it was simply that she had no better options. As Katherine prepared for bed in the small but clean hotel room, she placed a hand over her still flat abdomen. "We'll be all right," she whispered to her unborn child. "We'll find a way to survive." Morning came early, with Fletcher waiting in the lobby exactly when he said he would be. Katherine had slept better than expected, exhaustion overcoming anxiety. She had changed into her only other dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been her Sunday best, but now showed signs of wear. "Good morning," Fletcher greeted her, hat in hand. "Ready to get started?" At the general store, Fletcher insisted on purchasing not only necessities like toiletries and undergarments, but also fabric for new dresses, a warm shawl and sturdy boots better suited to ranch life than her worn town shoes. Katherine protested the expense, but Fletcher was firm. "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said. "Can't have my housekeeper looking like she's about to fall apart at the seams. Bad for my reputation." The store owner's wife helped Katherine select appropriate items while Fletcher browsed the tools section. When everything was gathered, Fletcher paid without comment, though Katherine noted the total came to nearly $20 more than a month's wages. Outside the store, Fletcher loaded her purchases into a wagon already filled with supplies, sacks of flour and sugar, coffee beans, tools, and other necessities. A bay horse was tied to the back. "That's Rusty," Fletcher said, noticing her looking at the horse. "My saddle mount." "The wagon team is Bess and June." Katherine climbed onto the wagon seat, arranging her skirts as Fletcher took the reins. As they pulled away from Miles City, Katherine couldn't help looking back at the town where she had spent the last 5 years of her life. It wasn't home anymore, perhaps it never truly had been. "Second thoughts?" Fletcher asked, noticing her backward glance. "No," she said firmly, turning to face forward. "I'm ready for what's ahead." The journey to the Lazy S Ranch took most of the day. Fletcher was not overly talkative, but he answered Katherine's questions about the ranch and the surrounding area. She learned that his nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, that he ran about 500 head of cattle with the help of 2 full-time hands and occasional extra help during roundup and branding. "What brought you out west?" Katherine asked as they stopped by a creek to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of bread and cheese. Fletcher took a drink from his canteen before answering. "The war changed everything back east. I served with the Union Army, came home to Pennsylvania to find my father dead, our family business struggling. Decided I needed a fresh start." He broke off a piece of bread. "Came out here, worked as a ranch hand for a few years, saved enough to buy my own land." "And your wife? Was she from back east too?" A small smile touched Fletcher's lips. "Sarah was Montana born and raised, daughter of the man I worked for. She had no interest in being a rancher's wife at first, told me she'd rather marry a rattlesnake, but I wore her down eventually." The smile faded. "We had 10 good years together before the fever took her." "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly. "It's not easy being left behind." Fletcher looked at her with new understanding. "No, it's not. How long were you and your husband married?" 5 years, Katherine replied, unconsciously twisting her wedding band. "We met in Boston. James came to repair the roof of my father's shop after a storm. He talked about the West, about the opportunities for a man willing to work hard. When my parents died of influenza within months of each other, there was nothing keeping me in Boston. We married and came out here." She looked across the vast landscape stretching before them. "It wasn't what I expected, but James was happy here. And you weren't." Fletcher's perception surprised her. Katherine chose her words carefully. "I was happy with James, the place itself. I'm still learning to appreciate its beauty. It's so different from where I grew up." Fletcher nodded in understanding. "The first year is the hardest. After that, the land gets under your skin. You start to see the beauty in the open spaces rather than feeling exposed by them." As they continued their journey, the landscape became more varied, with rolling hills and scattered pine forests breaking up the expanses of prairie grass. Late in the afternoon, they crested a hill and Fletcher pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is," he said, pointing to a valley below. "The Lazy S." Katherine's breath caught as she took in the view. A 2-story white house stood proudly in the center of a fenced yard, with a large red barn and several outbuildings nearby. A creek wound through the property, and cattle dotted the distant pastures. It was beautiful in a rugged, honest way that even her New England sensibilities could appreciate. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Fletcher looked pleased by her reaction. "It's home." As they approached the ranch, a boy came running from the direction of the barn, his blonde hair catching the late afternoon sun. He was tall for 10, with his father's blue eyes and a face smudged with dirt. "Pa, you're back early," he called, then stopped short when he spotted Katherine. His open expression immediately closed, wariness replacing excitement. "William, this is Mrs. Forrester," Fletcher said as he brought the wagon to a stop. "She'll be taking care of the house and cooking for us." William's eyes narrowed. "We don't need anyone. I can help with the house." "Son," Fletcher's voice held a warning. "Where are your manners?" The boy scowled but mumbled, "Nice to meet you, madam," without meeting Katherine's eyes. "It's nice to meet you too, William," Katherine replied, choosing to ignore his obvious displeasure. "Your father speaks highly of you." This seemed to surprise the boy, who glanced at his father with a flicker of curiosity before returning to his guarded expression. Two men emerged from the barn, the ranch hands, Katherine presumed. They approached the wagon, removing their hats as Fletcher introduced them. "This is Hank Miller, my foreman," he said, indicating the older of the two, a weathered man with a salt and pepper beard. "And that's Tobias Washington, best horseman in 3 territories." The second man was younger, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark skin and intelligent eyes that assessed Katherine curiously. "Madam," they both greeted her politely. "Mrs. Forrester is our new housekeeper," Fletcher explained. "She'll be starting immediately." Katherine noted that Fletcher made no mention of her pregnancy, and she was grateful for his discretion. That information could come later when she had established herself. "Thank the Lord," Hank said with feeling. Boss's cooking was likely to kill us all before winter. This broke some of the tension, and even William's mouth twitched as if fighting a smile. Fletcher chuckled good-naturedly. "Get the supplies unloaded, would you?" he asked the men. "I'll show Mrs. Forrester to her quarters." The inside of the house was exactly as Fletcher had described, spacious and well-built, but in desperate need of a woman's attention. Dust covered most surfaces, dirty dishes were stacked in the kitchen sink, and clothing was draped over various pieces of furniture in the main sitting room. "I apologize for the state of things," Fletcher said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I did warn you." "You did," Katherine agreed, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done first. "It's nothing that can't be fixed with some effort." Fletcher led her upstairs to a bedroom at the end of the hallway. "This will be your room," he said, opening the door. "It gets the morning sun." The room was simply furnished with a narrow bed, a pine dresser, and a small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked the distant mountains. It was clean, if somewhat bare, and Katherine suspected it had not been used in some time. "My room is downstairs," Fletcher said, pointing back toward the staircase. "William's is next to mine. The other rooms up here are for storage and guests, though we rarely have any." Katherine set her carpetbag on the bed. "It's perfect, thank you." Fletcher shifted his weight, suddenly looking unsure. "I'll let you get settled. Supper is usually at 6, but given the circumstances, we can make do with something simple tonight." "Nonsense," Katherine replied, removing her bonnet. "I'll have a proper meal ready by 6. Just give me half an hour to freshen up and get my bearings in the kitchen." Fletcher's relief was evident. "I appreciate that. I'll be out helping with the horses if you need anything." Once alone, Katherine allowed herself a moment of doubt. The task before her was daunting, not just cleaning this neglected house, but navigating her new role among these men and a resentful child, all while preparing for her own child's arrival. For a brief moment, she missed James with an intensity that took her breath away. He would have known what to say to make her laugh about this situation, to help her see the adventure in it rather than the challenge. But James was gone, and she was here. This was her life now, at least for the foreseeable future. With a deep breath, she unpacked her few belongings, washed her face in the basin provided, and headed downstairs to confront the disaster that was Fletcher Sheridan's kitchen. The kitchen was even worse than she had initially observed. The stove was caked with grease, the flour bin contained more weevils than flour, and the pantry was a jumble of misplaced items. But the root cellar yielded potatoes, carrots, and onions that were still good, and she found salt pork hanging in the smokehouse behind the kitchen. It would have to do. By 6 o'clock, Katherine had managed to produce a decent stew, biscuits that were only slightly burned on the bottom, and strong coffee. She rang the dinner bell that hung outside the kitchen door, surprised by the immediate response. Fletcher, William, Hank, and Tobias appeared within minutes, washing up at the pump outside before filing into the kitchen. "Smells like heaven," Hank declared, taking his seat at the large oak table. "It's just a simple stew," Katherine demurred, suddenly nervous as 4 sets of male eyes focused on her. "After the boss's cooking, anything that doesn't stick to the spoon upside down is a feast," Tobias said with a grin. Fletcher took his place at the head of the table. "Mrs. Forrester, would you care to say grace?" Katherine was touched by the gesture. She bowed her head and offered a simple prayer of thanks before serving the meal. William remained silent throughout dinner, responding only with monosyllables when directly addressed, but he cleaned his plate and even accepted seconds when Katherine offered. After the meal, Hank and Tobias thanked her profusely before heading back to the bunkhouse. William disappeared upstairs without a word, leaving Katherine alone with Fletcher. "That was the best meal I've had in months," he said, helping her clear the table despite her protests. "You've more than earned your keep already." Katherine felt a flush of pleasure at his praise. "Thank you. Though I should warn you, the pantry situation is dire. We'll need supplies soon if you want anything beyond basic meals." Fletcher nodded. "Make a list of what you need. I'll have one of the boys ride into town later this week." As they finished washing the dishes together, Fletcher drying while Katherine washed, a comfortable silence fell between them. There was something soothing about working alongside someone after months of loneliness following James's death. "William seems—" Katherine paused, searching for a diplomatic way to describe the boy's obvious resentment. "Difficult," Fletcher supplied with a wry smile. "He's testing boundaries, seeing if he can drive you away like the others." "Others? How many housekeepers have there been?" Fletcher grimaced. "3 in the past year. None lasted more than a month. The last one quit after William put a grass snake in her bedroom." Katherine couldn't help laughing. "Well, I grew up with 3 brothers. It will take more than a snake to frighten me away." Fletcher's expression softened. "I'm glad to hear it. William needs stability. We both do." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Katherine felt a connection that went beyond their business arrangement. Fletcher quickly looked away, returning the last plate to its shelf. "It's been a long day," he said, his voice gruff. "You should rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." "Good night, then," Katherine replied, strangely disappointed by the abrupt end to their conversation. "I'll have breakfast ready at sunrise." In the privacy of her room, Katherine changed into her nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed, brushing out her long auburn hair. Through the open window, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the chorus of frogs by the creek. It was so different from the town noises she had grown accustomed to, but not unpleasant. There was a peace here that had been lacking in Miles City. As she laid her head on the pillow, Katherine realized she had not thought about her eviction for hours. Perhaps this unexpected turn of events was exactly what she needed: a fresh start, just as Fletcher had sought when he came west. With that comforting thought, she drifted off to sleep, one hand resting protectively over her abdomen, the other still wearing James's wedding band. Her last conscious thought was a silent promise to her late husband that she would build a good life for their child, whatever challenges lay ahead. The first week at the Lazy S passed in a blur of activity as Katherine tackled the neglected house with determination. She began with the kitchen, scrubbing every surface until it gleamed, organizing the pantry, and creating a detailed list of supplies needed. The common areas came next: the sitting room, dining room, and Fletcher's office, where she dusted books and organized papers into neat piles, careful not to disturb his business records. Fletcher seemed both impressed and slightly bewildered by the transformation taking place in his home. "I'd forgotten the floor in here was actually pine," he commented one evening, looking at the newly scrubbed sitting room floor. "Thought it might be dirt by now." William remained standoffish, disappearing for most of the day and returning only for meals, which he ate in sullen silence. Katherine made attempts to engage him, asking about his interests and activities, but received only shrugs or one-word answers in response. On her 5th day at the ranch, Katherine was hanging freshly washed sheets on the line behind the house when she heard a commotion from the barn. Shielding her eyes from the sun, she saw William being marched across the yard by his father, Fletcher's face set in a grim expression. "Go to your room," Fletcher ordered as they passed her. "We'll discuss your punishment after I've calmed down." William stomped into the house, slamming the door behind him. Fletcher remained in the yard, his hands clenched at his sides, clearly struggling with his anger. "Is everything all right?" Katherine ventured after a moment. Fletcher ran a hand through his hair. "Found him smoking behind the barn." "He's 10 years old, for heaven's sake." "Where did he get tobacco?" "Stole it from Hank's pouch," Fletcher sighed. "It's not the first time he's done something like this. I just don't know how to reach him anymore." Katherine considered her words carefully. "Perhaps he needs more of your attention." Fletcher's head snapped up. "What do you mean by that?" "I don't mean to overstep," Katherine said quickly, "but I've noticed you're gone from sunup to sundown most days." "William spends that time alone or trailing after the hands who have their own work to do." "I'm running a ranch," Fletcher said, his tone defensive. "Someone has to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads." "Of course," Katherine agreed. "But maybe William could work alongside you sometimes. Learn the business from his father rather than just hearing about it at dinner." Fletcher was silent for a long moment, and Katherine feared she had indeed overstepped the boundaries of their arrangement. But when he finally spoke, his voice had lost its edge. "Sarah used to say the same thing," he admitted. "That I was so busy building something to leave to William that I wasn't spending enough time with him in the present." He looked toward the house, his expression softening. "You might be right. I'll think on it." The next morning, Katherine was surprised to see William joining his father for breakfast before dawn, dressed in work clothes and trying to hide his excitement behind a mask of nonchalance. Fletcher winked at her over his coffee cup as they headed out together, and Katherine felt a small sense of triumph. When they returned that evening, the change in William was remarkable. Though exhausted from a day of physical labor, he was animated at dinner, describing in detail how he had helped his father mend fences and check on a pregnant heifer. "Mrs. Forrester," he said suddenly, looking directly at her for perhaps the first time since her arrival. "Pa says you're having a baby." Katherine nearly dropped her fork, shooting a startled glance at Fletcher, who looked equally surprised. "William, that's not, it's all right," Katherine interrupted. "Yes, William, I am. The baby will come in the fall." William nodded thoughtfully. "Pa says the baby won't have a father just like I don't have a mother." His directness was startling but not unkind. "That seems fair." An awkward silence fell over the table. Katherine wasn't sure how to respond to such a blunt assessment, but she appreciated the boys' attempt at finding common ground between them. "I suppose there is a certain symmetry to it," she finally agreed. "Though I'm sorry you lost your mother. She must have been a wonderful woman." "I don't remember her much," William admitted, "just that she smelled like flowers and sang me to sleep." He glanced at his father, who was staring at his plate. "Pa doesn't like to talk about her." "Sometimes it's painful to speak about the people we've lost," Katherine said gently, "but that doesn't mean we should forget them." Fletcher looked up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. "No," he said softly, "we shouldn't forget." After that evening, A subtle shift occurred in the dynamics at the Lazy S. William began seeking out Katherine's company, first with small requests for help with torn clothing or questions about meals, then eventually sitting with her in the evenings while she mended or wrote in her journal. He was a bright child, curious about her life in Boston and her journey west, and Katherine found herself enjoying his company. Fletcher, too, seemed to be making an effort to be more present. He began returning to the house earlier in the evenings, sometimes bringing wildflowers he had gathered during his rounds of the property. "For the table," he would say casually, though Katherine noticed he always chose blooms that matched the blue of her eyes or the auburn of her hair. As April turned to May and the ranch burst into spring color, Katherine found herself settling into a routine that brought unexpected contentment. The morning sickness that had plagued her early pregnancy eased, and she felt stronger and more energetic. Her duties, which had seemed overwhelming at first, now gave her a sense of purpose and accomplishment. One Sunday, after returning from church in the nearest town, Fletcher suggested they have a picnic by the creek. Katherine packed cold chicken, biscuits, and apple tarts, and the three of them spent a lazy afternoon in the shade of cottonwood trees. William skipped stones across the water while Fletcher and Katherine sat on a blanket, talking about books they had read and places they had seen. "I never asked where you learned to cook so well," Fletcher said, biting into a tart with obvious appreciation. "My mother taught me the basics," Katherine replied, "but I improved mostly through trial and error after marrying James. His appetite was legendary among our friends." Fletcher studied her for a moment. "You must miss him terribly." Katherine looked out across the water, considering her answer. "I do," she said honestly. "James was kind and hardworking. We built a good life together." She placed a hand on her growing belly, which was just beginning to show. "But I've learned that grief changes with time. It doesn't disappear, but it makes room for other feelings." "Like what?" Fletcher asked, his voice low. Katherine met his gaze. "Hope, purpose, sometimes even happiness." Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared experience and mutual understanding. Fletcher reached out hesitantly, his hand covering hers where it rested on the blanket. His touch was warm and reassuring, and Katherine found herself turning her palm upward to lace her fingers with his. The moment was broken by William's shout of triumph, as he managed to skip a stone 5 times across the creek's surface. Fletcher withdrew his hand, but the connection between them lingered, a fragile thread that Katherine was afraid to examine too closely. As May turned to June, the work on the ranch intensified with the approach of summer. The cattle drive to the northern pastures kept Fletcher and the hands busy from dawn until dusk, and Katherine took on additional responsibilities, bringing meals to the men in the field and helping with some of the lighter outdoor chores. Her pregnancy was becoming more noticeable, her dresses growing tight across the middle. Fletcher arranged for the seamstress in town to visit the ranch, bringing patterns and fabric for maternity clothing. It was a thoughtful gesture that touched Katherine deeply. "You didn't have to do that," she told him when the seamstress had departed with measurements and plans for 3 new dresses. "I could have managed." "Nonsense," Fletcher replied. "You're working hard enough without having to worry about such things." "Besides," he added with a slight smile, "it's in my best interest to keep my housekeeper comfortable." Katherine knew it was more than that. Over the past weeks, their relationship had evolved beyond employer and employee. There was a tentative friendship between them, built on mutual respect and growing affection. Sometimes, she caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his expression a mixture of admiration and uncertainty that mirrored her own conflicted feelings. James had been gone less than 6 months. Was it disloyal to feel this stirring of interest in another man? Katherine didn't know. She only knew that Fletcher Sheridan had become important to her in ways that went beyond their business arrangement, and that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. The summer heat arrived in full force by mid-June, making the house stifling during the day. Katherine took to doing her baking in the early morning hours and spending the hottest part of the afternoon sitting in the shade of the front porch, where a consistent breeze made the temperature bearable. It was during one such afternoon that she heard hoofbeats approaching the house. Looking up from her mending, she was surprised to see Thomas Higgins, the bank agent who had evicted her, riding up the lane. Her heart began to pound with an irrational fear that he had come to displace her again. "Mrs. Forrester," Higgins called, removing his hat as he dismounted. "What a pleasant surprise. I had no idea you'd found employment with Sheridan." Katherine set aside her sewing, remaining seated as he approached the porch. Her advanced pregnancy gave her an excuse not to stand in greeting. "Mr. Higgins, what brings you to the Lazy S?" "Bank business with Sheridan," he replied, his eyes traveling to her protruding belly with poorly disguised distaste. "I see your situation has progressed." Katherine lifted her chin. "My husband's child will be born in the fall, yes." Higgins made a noncommittal sound. "Sheridan's a good man to take you in, given your condition. Very charitable." The implication that she was an object of charity rather than a valued employee stung, but Katherine refused to show it. "Mr. Sheridan is in the north pasture today. You're welcome to wait, but he may not return until evening." "I'll wait," Higgins decided, climbing the porch steps without invitation. "Too hot to ride back to town right now anyway." Katherine reluctantly offered him a seat and lemonade, which he accepted with the air of a man doing her a favor. His presence made her uneasy, bringing back memories of the worst day of her recent life. "I must say, Mrs. Forrester, you've landed on your feet rather nicely," Higgins remarked after several minutes of uncomfortable silence. "A position with one of the most prosperous ranchers in the territory. Some might even wonder if you had this arrangement in place before your eviction." Katherine stiffened. "I had never met Mr. Sheridan before that day. He offered me employment when no one else would." "Yes, I'm sure his motives were entirely professional." Higgins's insinuating tone made Katherine's cheeks burn. "Mr. Higgins, I don't appreciate what you're implying," she said coldly. "My relationship with Mr. Sheridan is entirely proper." Higgins raised an eyebrow, looking pointedly at her belly. "Of course. Just as I'm sure your husband's debts were entirely proper business transactions, not gambling losses." Katherine froze, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. "What did you say?" "Oh," Higgins's smile was cruel. "Did he not tell you? Your husband's investments were actually markers from poker games. He was quite the regular at the Silverton Saloon's back room, lost everything he had and then some." Katherine shook her head in denial. "That's not true. James wasn't a gambler." "Men keep all sorts of secrets from their wives, Mrs. Forrester. Just as I suspect Sheridan hasn't told you that his ranch is mortgaged to the hilt with my bank." Higgins sat back, clearly enjoying her distress. "Bad cattle prices last year hit him hard. He's 3 months behind on his payments." Before Katherine could respond, the sound of galloping hooves announced Fletcher's arrival. He pulled his horse to a stop in front of the porch, his expression darkening when he saw Higgins. "What are you doing here, Higgins?" he demanded, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Bank business, Sheridan," Higgins replied smoothly, rising to his feet. "Perhaps we could speak privately." Fletcher's eyes moved to Katherine, taking in her pale face and distressed expression. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Fine," she managed, though her voice sounded strangled even to her own ears. Fletcher's jaw tightened. "We can talk in my office, Higgins." He turned back to Katherine. "This won't take long." As the men disappeared into the house, Katherine sat trembling on the porch, her mind reeling. Was Higgins telling the truth about James? About Fletcher's financial troubles? She had no way of knowing, and the uncertainty was agonizing. Nearly an hour passed before Fletcher returned to the porch alone, his expression grim. He sat down heavily in the chair Higgins had vacated. "He's gone," he said simply. "Rode back to town." "Fletcher," Katherine began, then faltered, unsure how to ask about what Higgins had revealed. "Whatever he told you," Fletcher said, rubbing a hand across his face, "it probably wasn't the whole truth. Higgins enjoys stirring up trouble." "He said the ranch is in financial difficulty," Katherine said carefully. "That you're behind on your mortgage payments." Fletcher was silent for a long moment before nodding. "That part's true. Cattle prices fell last year, and I lost a good portion of the herd in a blizzard. I've been trying to rebuild, but it takes time." He looked at her directly. "I should have told you, but I didn't want you to worry about your position here. Your job is secure, Katherine, regardless of my financial situation." The sincerity in his voice reassured her on that point, but there was still the matter of James. He also said, "He said James lost our home gambling." Fletcher's expression softened. "I don't know if that's true, Katherine. Higgins could have been trying to taint your memories of your husband." "But it could be true," she pressed. "You knew James. Was he a gambler?" Fletcher hesitated. "I didn't know him well. I saw him in town occasionally at the general store or the livery. He seemed like a decent man." He reached for her hand. "Does it matter now? Whatever mistakes James made, he loved you. That much was clear to anyone who saw you together." Katherine felt tears welling in her eyes. "It matters because I thought I knew him completely. If this is true, then he lied to me for years. How can I trust my own judgment if I was so wrong about the man I married?" Fletcher's hand tightened around hers. "We all have secrets, Katherine. Parts of ourselves we hide even from those closest to us." "Do you," she asked, looking into his blue eyes, "have secrets from me?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the immediate context. Fletcher held her gaze steadily. "Nothing that would hurt you," he said finally. "But yes, there are things I haven't told you, not because I want to deceive you, but because some truths take time to reveal." It wasn't the answer she had expected, but it was honest. Katherine found herself nodding. "I understand," she said softly. "Thank you for that, at least." They sat in silence as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the yard. The peace of the ranch gradually soothed Katherine's troubled thoughts. Whatever James had done, whatever secrets Fletcher still kept, she was here now, creating a new life for herself and her child. That was what mattered most. "Will you be all right?" Fletcher asked eventually, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I know Higgins upset you." "I'll be fine," Katherine assured him, and was surprised to find it was true. "It was a shock, that's all. I need time to process it." Fletcher nodded, releasing her hand reluctantly. "I should check on William. He's supposed to be cleaning the tack room, but knowing my son, he's found some mischief instead." As he stood to leave, Katherine called after him. "Fletcher, are we going to be all right? The ranch, I mean." He turned back, his expression resolute. "Yes. I've worked too hard to lose this place. I'll find a way through this, Katherine. I promise." She believed him. Despite everything, she trusted this man who had taken her in when she had nothing, who had given her a home and purpose when she most needed it. Whatever happened with the bank, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The thought should have frightened her, this growing dependence on Fletcher. Instead, it filled her with a quiet strength. For the first time since James's death, Katherine felt as if she was exactly where she was meant to be. July brought scorching heat and the relentless work of haying season. Every able body on the ranch was needed to cut, rake, and stack the winter feed for the cattle. Even Katherine contributed, driving the water wagon to the fields and preparing enormous meals to sustain the workers through their long days. One evening, as she was setting out supper for the exhausted crew, Fletcher approached her with concern etched on his sun-browned face. "You're doing too much," he said, taking the heavy pot from her hands. "In your condition, you should be resting more." Katherine smiled at his worry. "I'm pregnant, not ill. Women have been working through pregnancy since the beginning of time." "Not on my ranch," Fletcher replied firmly. "Starting tomorrow, you're to take it easier. I've asked Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch to come help with the cooking during haying. Her boys are old enough to manage without her for a few days." Katherine wanted to protest, but was secretly relieved. The heat and extra work had been taxing, and her body was reminding her more frequently of its changing state. "All right," she conceded, "but only because it makes sense to have help during the busiest time." Fletcher's smile told her he saw through her attempt to save face, but he merely nodded. "Of course, purely practical." That night, after the workers had eaten and departed for their beds, Katherine sat on the porch enjoying the relative cool of the evening. The baby was active, kicking and rolling in a way that was both uncomfortable and reassuring. She placed her hand on her abdomen, smiling at a particularly forceful movement. "May I?" Fletcher's voice startled her. He had approached so quietly she hadn't heard him come onto the porch for a moment. Katherine wasn't sure what he was asking. Then she realized he was looking at her hand on her belly, and her heart skipped a beat. "Of course," she said softly, taking his larger hand and placing it where the baby was most active. Fletcher's expression changed from curiosity to wonder as he felt the child move beneath his palm. "That's amazing," he murmured. "I'd forgotten. Sarah wouldn't let me feel William kick. She said it wasn't proper." Katherine couldn't imagine denying such a simple joy to someone she cared about. "Well, I'm not particularly concerned with propriety out here in the wilderness," she said lightly. Though her pulse quickened at his continued touch, Fletcher's hand remained on her belly, warm and steady. "Katherine," he began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. "I want you to know that you and the baby will always have a place here, regardless of our arrangement. I don't want you to worry about the future." His kindness nearly undid her. "Thank you," she managed, blinking back sudden tears. "That means more than I can say." Fletcher's other hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You've brought life back to this house," he said quietly. "To me and William. I don't think I realized how empty things were until you filled the space." Katherine leaned into his touch, unable to deny the feelings that had been growing between them. "Fletcher." A wolf howled in the distance, breaking the moment. Fletcher withdrew his hand reluctantly, clearing his throat. "It's getting late. You should rest." "Yes," Katherine agreed, though rest was the furthest thing from her mind. Her skin still tingled where he had touched her, and her emotions were in turmoil. "Good night, Fletcher." As she lay in bed that night, Katherine confronted the truth she had been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Fletcher Sheridan. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had not expected to find love again so soon after losing James, had not been looking for it. Yet here it was, unavoidable and powerful. But what did Fletcher feel? He was a kind man, considerate of her situation. His concern might be nothing more than the care of a decent employer for a vulnerable employee. The moments of connection between them could be one-sided, a product of her own loneliness and hormonal state. Even if he did share her feelings, was either of them ready to act on them? Katherine carried another man's child, and Fletcher still had unresolved grief over his wife's death. The complications were numerous. With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Katherine eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep, only to be awakened before dawn by a commotion outside. Voices shouted urgently, and the sound of running footsteps passed beneath her window. Throwing on a robe, she hurried downstairs to find William in the kitchen, his face pale with fear. "What's happening?" she asked, pulling her robe tighter around her. "Fire in the north hayfield," William replied, his voice shaking. "Pa and the men went to fight it. He told me to stay here with you." Katherine's heart raced with fear. Prairie fires were a deadly threat, capable of destroying everything in their path within minutes. "How bad is it?" William shook his head. "Don't know." Hank saw it from the bunkhouse, said it wasn't huge yet, but the wind's picking up. Katherine moved quickly, filling the stove with wood and setting water to boil. "The men will need food and drink when they return. Let's prepare for them." Working together, she and William assembled sandwiches, brewed coffee, and filled canteens with water. The activity gave them both purpose, keeping panic at bay as they waited for news. William proved to be capable help, and Katherine was touched by his concern for her as he insisted she sit while he reached for items on high shelves. "Pa likes you a lot," he said suddenly as they worked. "More than he lets on." Katherine nearly dropped the knife she was using to slice bread. "Oh." William nodded seriously. "I heard him talking to Hank about you, said you made him remember what it was like to have a real home again." He glanced at her sideways. "I think he wants to ask you to stay, not just as the housekeeper, I mean." Katherine's cheeks flushed. "William, that's not, we shouldn't speculate about your father's private thoughts." The boy shrugged. "It's not speculating if I heard him say it, and anyway, it would be good if you stayed. For real, I mean, you're nice, and you make good pie." He considered this the highest possible praise, clearly. Before Katherine could formulate a response, the kitchen door burst open and Fletcher appeared, his face and clothes blackened with soot, his expression grim. "We've contained it for now, but we need more men." "William, ride to the Henderson place and ask for help. Tell them to bring shovels and blankets." William nodded, immediately heading for the door. "Be careful," Katherine called after him, then turned to Fletcher. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. We lost about 5 acres of hay already, and if the wind shifts—" He didn't need to finish the thought. If the fire reached the dry summer grass beyond the hayfields, it could sweep through the entire valley, taking the ranch with it. "What can I do?" Katherine asked, handing him a cup of water which he drained in one gulp. "Pray," he said grimly, "and have food ready for the men when they return. This will be a long day." The hours that followed were some of the most nerve-wracking of Katherine's life. William returned with Mr. Henderson and his 2 teenage sons, all of whom immediately joined the firefighting efforts. Katherine prepared food, boiled water for burns, and tried to keep her fears in check as smoke drifted over the ranch house. By mid-afternoon, exhausted men began returning in shifts to eat and rest briefly before heading back to the fire line. Hank reported that they were making progress, but the situation was still precarious. "Boss is working himself to death out there," he told Katherine as she bandaged a burn on his arm. "Won't take a break, even though he's been at it since before dawn." "That sounds like Fletcher," Katherine sighed. "Stubborn as an old mule." "Might listen to you, though," Hank suggested with a knowing look. "He sets store by what you think." Katherine wasn't sure that was true, but she decided to try anyway. Filling a canteen with fresh water and packing some food, she made her way toward the smoke on the horizon. The closer she got, the more devastated the landscape appeared. Charred earth, smoldering hay bales, and men with soot-blackened faces wielding shovels and wet blankets to beat back the flames. She spotted Fletcher at the eastern edge of the fire, working alongside Tobias to dig a fire break. Even from a distance, she could see his exhaustion in the set of his shoulders and the way he leaned on his shovel between strikes. "Fletcher," she called, approaching carefully across the burned ground. He turned, his expression changing from determination to concern when he saw her. "Katherine, you shouldn't be out here. The smoke is no worse than cooking over a wood stove all day," she interrupted, handing him the canteen. "Drink, and then take a break and eat something before you collapse." Fletcher looked as if he might argue, but after taking a long drink of water, the fight seemed to leave him. 10 minutes, he conceded, allowing her to lead him to a relatively smoke-free spot downwind of the fire. Up close, he looked even worse than she had feared. His face was streaked with sweat and soot, his eyes red from smoke, and his hands were blistered from hours of digging. Without thinking, Katherine took his hands in hers, examining the raw skin. "You need to have these treated," she said, her voice softening with concern. "Later," Fletcher replied, though he didn't withdraw his hands from her gentle inspection. "When the fire's out." Katherine looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "You're no good to anyone if you work yourself to death," she said firmly. "The ranch needs you." "William needs you." She hesitated, then added softly, "I need you." Something changed in Fletcher's eyes, a spark that had nothing to do with the nearby flames. "Do you?" he asked, his voice rough from smoke and emotion. "Yes," Katherine admitted, unable to deny the truth any longer. "More than I expected to. More than is probably wise." Fletcher's hands turned in hers, his fingers curling around her wrists with gentle pressure. "Katherine," a shout from the fire line interrupted whatever he had been about to say. "Boss, wind's shifting." The moment shattered as Fletcher's attention snapped back to the emergency at hand. "I have to go," he said, releasing her reluctantly. "Stay at the house, please." Katherine nodded, stepping back. "Be careful." He gave her one last look, filled with unspoken words, before running back to join his men at the fire line. Katherine watched him go, her heart pounding with the realization that whatever was happening between them had just shifted irrevocably, like the wind that now threatened to spread the fire in a new direction. The battle against the fire continued until sunset, when a merciful light rain began to fall, helping to douse the remaining flames. By nightfall, the immediate danger had passed, leaving behind a blackened scar on the landscape and a group of exhausted, smoke-stained men. Katherine had hot food waiting and tubs of water for washing. She treated burns, bandaged blistered hands, and ensured everyone had a hot meal before falling into bed. Fletcher was the last to return, so tired he could barely stand. "You need to eat," Katherine insisted, guiding him to a chair at the kitchen table. "And then I'm going to treat those hands." Fletcher didn't argue, too exhausted to resist her care. He ate mechanically, his gaze occasionally finding hers across the table, something unresolved burning in his eyes despite his fatigue. When he had finished eating, Katherine brought a basin of warm water and clean cloths to the table. "Give me your hands," she said softly. Fletcher complied, wincing slightly as she gently cleaned the dirt and soot from his blistered palms. Her touch was tender as she applied salve to the raw skin and wrapped his hands in clean bandages. "You're good at this," he murmured, watching her work. "Taking care of people." "I've had practice," Katherine replied with a small smile. "Brothers who were always getting into scrapes, a husband who thought he was invincible until he wasn't, and now a household of men who seemed determined to work themselves to exhaustion." Fletcher's expression sobered at the mention of James. "Katherine, about what you said earlier, "We don't have to talk about it now," she interrupted, suddenly uncertain. "You're exhausted and emotions run high during emergencies." Fletcher shook his head. "No, this can't wait." He captured her hand between his bandaged ones. "I need you to know that I care for you, Katherine, more than is appropriate for an employer, more than I expected to care for anyone again after Sarah." Katherine's breath caught. "Fletcher, let me finish," he said gently. "I don't want to rush you. I know you're still grieving James, still preparing for his child. I know the timing is all wrong, but I needed you to know that your feelings, if they're what I hope they are, aren't one-sided." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. "They're not," she whispered. "I care for you too, Fletcher. It caught me by surprise, but it's real." Fletcher's face softened with relief and something more, a tenderness that made Katherine's heart swell. "Then we'll take this slowly," he said, raising her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "One day at a time." That night, Katherine lay awake long after the household had fallen silent, her mind and heart too full for sleep. The day had brought terror and exhaustion, but also a new beginning. She placed her hand on her rounded belly, feeling the gentle movements of her child. "Your father would want us to be happy," she whispered. "I think he would approve of Fletcher. He's a good man like James was, different but good." As if in answer, the baby gave a strong kick and Katherine smiled through her tears. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rebuilding after the fire, navigating the changing relationship with Fletcher, preparing for her child's birth, but for the first time in months. The future seemed bright with promise rather than shadowed with uncertainty. August brought cooler temperatures and a sense of urgency to the Lazy S. The fire had destroyed nearly 20 acres of hayfield, a significant loss that would impact their winter feed supplies. Fletcher worked tirelessly to arrange purchases from neighboring ranches who had surplus, while simultaneously supervising repairs to damaged fences and equipment. Katherine's pregnancy had entered its final trimester, bringing increasing discomfort, but also a sense of anticipation. She had begun preparing a corner of her bedroom for the baby, using her sewing skills to create small garments and blankets. William, to her surprise, took an interest in these preparations, often sitting with her in the evenings as she worked. "What will you name it?" he asked one night as she embroidered a tiny gown. "I'm not certain yet," Katherine replied. "If it's a boy, perhaps James after his father. For a girl, maybe Elizabeth after my mother." William considered this. "Those are good names, but you could also use Sarah if it's a girl." He said this casually, but Katherine recognized the significance of his suggestion. "That's a beautiful thought, William," she said gently. "Would it be all right with you if I considered that?" He nodded, seemingly embarrassed by his own sentimentality. "Pa would like it," he mumbled before changing the subject. Katherine's relationship with Fletcher had evolved in subtle ways since their conversation after the fire. There were no grand declarations or dramatic changes, but rather small moments of connection, his hand lingering on hers when passing a dish at dinner, shared glances across a room, conversations that stretched late into the evening after William had gone to bed. They were taking their time, as Fletcher had suggested, but Katherine felt herself falling more deeply in love with him each day. She loved his dedication to the ranch and his son, his quiet strength and occasional flashes of dry humor. She loved the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, and how he hummed tunelessly while doing paperwork in his office. One afternoon in late August, Katherine was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the now familiar sound of an approaching rider. Expecting it to be one of the neighboring ranchers coming to discuss business with Fletcher, she was shocked to see Thomas Higgins once again approaching the house. Her heart sank. Higgins's previous visit had brought nothing but distress, and she feared what his presence might mean now. Fletcher was out checking cattle with Tobias and wouldn't return until evening. "Mrs. Forrester," Higgins called, dismounting with a smirk. "Still here, I see, and more substantial than before." His eyes lingered on her enlarged abdomen in a way that made her skin crawl. "Mr. Higgins," she replied coolly. "Mr. Sheridan isn't here. I can tell him you called." Higgins shook his head, climbing the porch steps uninvited. "Actually, it's you I've come to see this time." Catherine's wariness increased. "Me? What business could we possibly have?" "Information has come to my attention that I thought might interest you," Higgins said, making himself comfortable in a porch chair. "About your late husband." Catherine stiffened. "I thought we had exhausted that topic during your last visit." "Not quite." Higgins reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "These came into the bank's possession recently. They're letters from your husband to a woman named Eliza Morgan." Catherine's mouth went dry. "What?" "Love letters, Mrs. Forrester, quite explicit ones at that." Higgins's smile was cruel. "It seems your devoted husband was planning to leave you for the widow Morgan, yes, the same one who runs the boarding house. They were apparently quite involved for some time." Catherine stared at the envelope, feeling as if the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. "I don't believe you." "See for yourself." Higgins extended the envelope. "Your husband's handwriting should be familiar to you." With trembling hands, Catherine took the envelope and withdrew several sheets of paper. The handwriting was unmistakably James's, the distinctive way he formed his capital letters, the slight slant to the right. She only needed to read a few lines to confirm the nature of the correspondence. "Why?" she whispered, more to herself than to Higgins. "Why would you bring these to me?" Higgins leaned forward. "Because I want you to understand that Sheridan is cut from the same cloth. Men like them, they take what they want and discard women when they are done. He's using you, Mrs. Forrester, just as your husband used you." Catherine's head snapped up, anger cutting through her shock. "That's not true. Fletcher is nothing like—" She stopped herself, realizing she was being baited. "Isn't he?" Higgins raised an eyebrow. "Ask yourself why a successful rancher would take in a pregnant widow with no connections or resources. He's getting exactly what he wants: a housekeeper, a woman in his bed, and eventually a mother for his wild son. Once he's tired of you, you'll be back on the street where I found you." "Get out," Catherine said, her voice shaking with fury. "Get off this property now." Higgins stood, satisfied that his barbs had found their mark. "Keep the letters, a reminder that men can't be trusted." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day, Mrs. Forrester. I do hope Sheridan is more faithful to you than your husband was." Catherine remained on the porch long after Higgins had ridden away, the letters clutched in her hand. She wanted to dismiss them as forgeries, a cruel trick by a malicious man. But the evidence was irrefutable. James had betrayed her, had been planning to leave her even before his death. The revelation cast every memory of their marriage in a new, painful light. Had anything been real? Had he ever truly loved her? Or had she been a convenient wife until something better came along? And what about Fletcher? Was Higgins right about his motives as well? The doubt crept in like poison, tainting her newfound happiness. She had been deceived once. How could she trust that it wasn't happening again? By the time Fletcher returned that evening, Catherine had composed herself outwardly, but inside she was in turmoil. She served dinner mechanically, answering Fletcher's and William's questions with brief responses that did little to hide her distress. "Catherine, what's wrong?" Fletcher asked when William had gone upstairs to bed. "You've barely said 2 words all evening." She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Higgins came by today." Fletcher's expression darkened. "What did that snake want now?" "He brought me something." Katherine went to the sideboard where she had placed the letters, retrieving them with reluctance. Letters from James to another woman. Romantic letters. Fletcher's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with sympathy. "Katherine, I'm so sorry. It seems my husband was planning to leave me," she continued, her voice steadier than she felt. "For Widow Morgan, of all people. The entire time I was mourning him, she probably was too. What a pair of fools we must have seemed to everyone in town." "You couldn't have known," Fletcher said gently. "That's just it, I should have known," Katherine replied, anger and hurt bleeding into her voice. "There were signs if I'd been willing to see them. The late nights working, the sudden trips to town, the distance between us those last months." She looked at Fletcher directly. "It makes me question my judgment. How can I trust my feelings when I was so completely wrong before?" Fletcher seemed to understand the real question beneath her words. "Katherine, what Higgins told you about James doesn't change what's happening between us. My feelings for you are genuine." "Are they?" Katherine challenged, Higgins's insinuations echoing in her mind. "Or am I just convenient? A ready-made housekeeper and potential mother figure for William, willing to accept whatever scraps of affection you offer, because I have nowhere else to go." The hurt that flashed across Fletcher's face made her immediately regret her words, but she couldn't take them back. "Is that really what you think of me?" he asked quietly. "That I would manipulate you that way?" Katherine closed her eyes briefly. "No, I don't know. I'm confused and hurt and afraid of making the same mistakes again." Fletcher moved closer, though he didn't touch her. "Katherine, look at me." When she met his gaze, he continued, "I understand your doubts. I'd probably feel the same in your position, but I need you to know that what I feel for you is real. It wasn't part of some plan. It happened despite my best intentions to keep things professional between us." His sincerity was evident, but Katherine's wounded heart remained cautious. "I need time, Fletcher. Time to sort through all of this." "Take all the time you need," he said, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "I'll be here when you're ready to talk again." That night, Katherine cried herself to sleep, mourning not only James's betrayal but also the shadow it had cast over her budding relationship with Fletcher. Part of her wanted to rush downstairs, to tell Fletcher she believed him, and that her doubts had been merely a momentary weakness. But another part, the part that had been blindsided by James's deception, urged caution. She needed to protect herself and her child from further heartbreak. The next few days passed in awkward tension. Katherine performed her duties as usual, but the easy companionship she had shared with Fletcher was replaced by stilted conversations and careful distance. Even William noticed the change, looking between them with confusion during meals. 5 days after Higgins's visit, Katherine was kneading bread dough in the kitchen when Fletcher entered, his expression determined. "I need to show you something," he said without preamble. "Can you leave that for now and come with me?" Curious despite her reservations, Katherine covered the dough and wiped flour from her hands. "Where are we going?" "Not far," Fletcher assured her, helping her into a light shawl before leading her outside to where 2 horses waited. "Can you still ride? We could take the wagon if you prefer." "I can manage," Katherine said, allowing him to help her onto the gentler of the 2 horses. Her pregnancy made mounting awkward, but once seated, she felt secure enough. They rode in silence for about 20 minutes, heading toward a part of the ranch Katherine hadn't visited before. As they crested a small hill, she saw their destination, a fenced plot of land beneath a large cottonwood tree. A cemetery. Fletcher dismounted and helped her down, then led her through the gate into the small family graveyard. There were only 3 graves, each marked with a simple wooden cross. The largest bore the name Sarah Elizabeth Sheridan, beloved wife and mother. "I come here sometimes when I need to think," Fletcher said quietly. to remember and to let go. Katherine stood respectfully before Sarah's grave, understanding that Fletcher was sharing something deeply personal with her. She must have been a wonderful woman. She was, Fletcher agreed, strong, kind, stubborn as the day is long. He smiled faintly at the memory. But our marriage wasn't perfect, Katherine. No marriage is. We had our struggles, our secrets, our disappointments. He gestured to the smaller graves on either side of Sarah's. These were our daughters. Mary lived for 3 days. Grace was stillborn a year later. His voice grew husky with old grief. Sarah never recovered from losing them. She withdrew from me, from William. The Sarah I buried wasn't the same woman I married. The fever took her body, but grief had already claimed much of her spirit. Katherine's heart ached for him, for the losses he had endured. "I'm so sorry, Fletcher." He turned to face her fully. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that I know marriages are complicated. I know people make mistakes, keep secrets, hurt each other without meaning to. Your husband's betrayal doesn't diminish what you shared that was genuine, just as Sarah's withdrawal doesn't erase the love we had in better times." Katherine felt tears well in her eyes at his compassion and wisdom. "But most importantly," Fletcher continued, taking her hands in his, "I want you to know that I'm not offering you scraps of affection or using you to fill a void. What I feel for you is new and different and entirely yours. You're not a replacement for Sarah any more than I could be a replacement for James." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm falling in love with you, Katherine Forrester, not because it's convenient or because you fit some role I need filled, but because you're you." The simple honesty of his declaration broke through the walls of doubt Katherine had erected. "I believe you," she whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "And I'm falling in love with you too, Fletcher. I was just so afraid." "I know," he said, drawing her into his arms. "Fear is natural after betrayal, but we can be afraid together and brave together too." Katherine rested her head against his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her cheek. Here, in this place of death and remembrance, something new was being born between them, a love grounded in truth and shared vulnerability. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said softly, "for trusting me with your past." Fletcher's arms tightened around her. "This is part of who I am. If we're going to build something together, you should know all of me, not just the parts that are easy to share." As they stood together beneath the spreading branches of the cottonwood, Katherine felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since learning of James's betrayal. The past couldn't be changed, but it didn't have to determine her future. She could choose to trust again, to love again, to build a new life with this man who held her as if she were precious. When they finally mounted their horses to return to the ranch, Katherine felt as though a weight had been lifted from her heart. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she no longer faced them alone. The final weeks of summer passed in a sweeter rhythm as Katherine and Fletcher cautiously deepened their relationship. There were tender moments, his hand on the small of her back as they walked together in the evening, her fingers brushing his hair from his forehead as he bent over account books, shared laughter over William's antics. There were also practical considerations. As Katherine's pregnancy advanced, Fletcher insisted on hiring a woman from town to help with the heavier household chores. He also arranged for the doctor from Miles City to visit the ranch, ensuring that both Katherine and the baby were healthy. "The baby is positioned well, Doctor," Peterson assured them after examining Katherine. "Everything appears normal. First babies often come late, so don't be surprised if you go beyond your expected time." "And is it safe for her to remain here?" Fletcher asked, his concern evident. "The town is nearly an hour's ride away." The doctor packed his instruments thoughtfully. "Many women deliver with just the assistance of a midwife or experienced neighbor. I'll leave instructions, and Mrs. Henderson from the next ranch has delivered several babies. If there's time to fetch me when labor begins, send for me, but don't worry unduly if things progress quickly." After the doctor departed, Fletcher found Katherine in the nursery corner she had created in her bedroom. "I want you to move downstairs," he said without preamble, "to the bedroom next to mine. It'll be easier when the time comes and afterward with the baby." Katherine hesitated. "Fletcher, that's your wife's old room, isn't it?" He nodded. "It's been empty for 5 years. It's time it was used again." The significance of this gesture wasn't lost on Katherine. He was offering her a permanent place in his home, not just as an employee but as something more. "Are you certain?" "More certain than I've been about anything in a long time," he replied, taking her hand. "Katherine, I know we've agreed to take things slowly, and I respect that, but I want you to know that I see a future for us, you, me, William, and this little one." He placed his other hand gently on her rounded belly. "I want us to be a family if you'll have us." Katherine felt tears of happiness well in her eyes. "I want that too," she whispered. "More than anything." Fletcher smiled, the joy in his eyes matching her own. "Then it's settled. We'll move your things tomorrow." September brought the first hints of autumn to Montana, cooler nights, leaves beginning to turn on the cottonwoods by the creek, and a sense of urgency as the ranch prepared for winter. Katherine's due date approached, bringing both excitement and anxiety. Her body felt unwieldy, sleep was increasingly difficult, and the baby seemed to press against every internal organ simultaneously. "You look exhausted," Fletcher commented one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Are you sleeping at all?" "In short bursts," Katherine admitted, shifting uncomfortably on the bench they shared. "The baby is nocturnal, apparently, active all night, quiet all day." Fletcher placed his arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. "Not long now," he said, his voice a soothing rumble against her ear. "Though I admit I'll miss seeing you like this," Katherine laughed. "Like a beached whale, like a miracle," he corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're beautiful, Katherine. I've never seen anything more beautiful than you carrying a child." His words warmed her heart, easing some of the physical discomfort. Since her move to the downstairs bedroom, their relationship had grown more intimate, though still restrained by the propriety both felt was important given her condition. There had been gentle kisses and long embraces, but nothing more, a fact that Katherine both appreciated and occasionally regretted. "Fletcher," she said hesitantly, "after the baby comes, what happens next? Between us, I mean." He was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking her arm thoughtfully. "That depends on what you want, Katherine. I know what I want, but I won't pressure you." "What do you want?" she asked, looking up at him in the fading light. His eyes held hers steadily. "I want to marry you, to raise this child as my own alongside William, to build a life together here on the Lazy S." He paused, his expression vulnerable. "But I understand if that's not what you want, or if you need more time." Katherine felt her heart swell with love for this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly and changed it so profoundly. "It is what I want," she said softly. "I love you, Fletcher. I want to be your wife, to make a family with you and William." The joy that transformed his face made him look years younger. "You've made me the happiest man in Montana," he said, cupping her face in his hands with reverent tenderness before kissing her softly. The moment was interrupted by a sharp pain that made Katherine gasp and pull away. "What is it?" Fletcher asked, instantly alert. Katherine placed a hand on her belly, feeling the muscles contract beneath her palm. I think it might be time," she said, a mixture of excitement and fear coloring her voice. Fletcher's eyes widened. "The baby, now, maybe. It could be false labor. I've had twinges before." Even as she said it, Another pain gripped her, stronger than the first. Or maybe not. Fletcher was on his feet immediately. "I'll send Tobias for the doctor. Hank can ride for Mrs. Henderson. William can help me get hot water and clean linens ready." His efficiency was reassuring, though Katherine could see the panic beneath his calm exterior. "Fletcher," she said, catching his hand before he could rush off. "It's going to be all right. First babies take their time. There's no need to raise the alarm just yet." He took a deep breath, visibly steadying himself. "You're right. Let me help you inside and we'll see if the pains continue." The next few hours were a lesson in patience as Katherine's labor established itself in a slow, steady rhythm. Fletcher stayed by her side, timing the contractions as doctor. Peterson had instructed, offering water and support. William hovered anxiously in the doorway until Katherine asked him to read to her between pains, a task he took on with surprising enthusiasm. By midnight, there was no doubt that the baby was coming. Tobias had returned with word that Dr. Peterson was delivering another baby in town, but would come as soon as possible. Mrs. Henderson arrived shortly after, bringing calm competence and decades of experience to the birthing room. "You're doing fine, dear," she assured Katherine after examining her. "The baby's taking its time, but that's normal for a first. We have hours yet." Katherine nodded through a contraction, gripping Fletcher's hand so tightly she feared she might break his fingers. He didn't complain, his face a mask of concern and love. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised when she apologized for hurting him. "I'll be right here for as long as you want me." As dawn approached, Katherine's labor intensified. The contractions came faster and harder, leaving her breathless and exhausted between them. Mrs. Henderson shooed William off to bed despite his protests, but Fletcher remained, supporting Katherine through each wave of pain. "I can't do this," Katherine gasped after a particularly brutal contraction. "It's too much." "You can," Fletcher insisted, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Katherine Forrester. This baby is lucky to have you for a mother." His unwavering faith gave her strength to continue as the sun rose over the Montana plains, bringing with it the final, most intense phase of labor. Mrs. Henderson positioned herself at the foot of the bed, giving calm instructions as Katherine felt the overwhelming urge to push. "That's it," the older woman encouraged. "The baby's coming now. Push when your body tells you to." Fletcher supported Katherine's back, murmuring words of love and encouragement as she bore down with all her remaining strength. The pain was indescribable, a searing fire that consumed her entire being, but beneath it was a fierce determination to bring her child safely into the world. With one final, monumental effort, Katherine felt the baby slip from her body, the sudden relief almost as overwhelming as the pain had been. A moment of silence was followed by a lusty cry that brought tears to her eyes. "A boy," Mrs. Henderson announced, lifting the squalling infant for Katherine to see. "A fine, healthy boy. James," Katherine whispered, reaching for her son with trembling arms. "James Fletcher Forrester." The baby was placed on her chest, still connected to her by the umbilical cord, his tiny body warm and slippery against her skin. Katherine stared in wonder at his red, angry face, the thatch of dark hair, the perfect miniature fingers that curled reflexively around her own. "He's beautiful," Fletcher said, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed at the child. "Perfect." Katherine looked up at him, seeing tears in his eyes that matched her own. "Would you like to hold him, once Mrs. Henderson has cleaned him up a bit?" The surprise and gratitude on Fletcher's face touched her deeply. "I'd be honored," he said. After the cord was cut and the afterbirth delivered, Mrs. Henderson efficiently cleaned and swaddled the baby before placing him in Fletcher's waiting arms. The big, strong rancher who could break a wild horse and work from dawn until dusk without complaint held the tiny infant with a gentleness that made Katherine's heart swell with love. "Hello, James," Fletcher said softly, a finger tracing the baby's cheek. "I'm not your father by blood, but I promise to love you as my own for all my days." Katherine watched them together, overwhelmed by exhaustion and joy, and the certainty that this man would keep that promise no matter what challenges lay ahead. Dr. Peterson arrived just as Mrs. Henderson was helping Katherine into a clean nightgown, the exhausted new mother having been bathed and the bed linens changed. The doctor examined both mother and baby, pronouncing them healthy and congratulating Fletcher as if he were the actual father, an assumption neither of them corrected. "Get some rest," the doctor advised Katherine. "You've done all the hard work. Now comes the reward." As the household settled into a quiet celebration of the new arrival, Katherine drifted in and out of sleep, waking to feed her son when he cried and accepting the tender care Fletcher provided. He brought her broth and tea, adjusted her pillows, and watched over both her and the baby with devoted attention. William was allowed to meet his new brother that afternoon, his initial wariness giving way to fascination when the baby grabbed his finger with surprising strength. "He likes me," the boy announced with pride. "Can I hold him?" Under Katherine's watchful eye, William was settled in a chair with the baby carefully positioned in his arms. "Remember to support his head," she instructed, touched by the serious concentration on William's face. "I will," he promised. "I'm going to teach him everything when he gets bigger, how to ride and fish and throw a lasso." "I'm sure he'll appreciate having such a knowledgeable big brother," Katherine said, exchanging a smile with Fletcher over William's head. That evening, when the house had grown quiet and the baby slept contentedly in his cradle beside Katherine's bed, Fletcher sat on the edge of the mattress, taking her hand in his. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small object. "It was my mother's. I've been saving it for the right moment." He opened his palm to reveal a gold ring with a small pearl set in a circle of tiny diamonds. "It's not fancy," he said apologetically. "Just a simple thing from Pennsylvania, nothing grand like the jewelry you might have had in Boston." "It's beautiful," Katherine whispered, touched beyond words that he had preserved this family heirloom through all his travels and hardships. "I know this isn't the most romantic proposal," Fletcher continued, suddenly seeming nervous. "You just gave birth, we're both exhausted, and there should probably be flowers or something more special than this bedroom. But I don't want to wait another day to ask you to be my wife." Katherine felt tears welling again. She seemed to cry at everything since giving birth, her emotions close to the surface and unguarded. "It's perfect, Fletcher. You're perfect." "Far from it," he smiled, sliding the ring onto her finger. "But I promise to love you and James as well as I know how, for as long as I live." Katherine drew him down for a gentle kiss, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I will marry you, Fletcher Sheridan." He rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the quiet room. "As soon as you're recovered," he promised, "we'll ride into town and make it official, and then we build our life together day by day." Fletcher glanced at the sleeping infant in his cradle. "We raise our boys, work the ranch, face whatever comes our way as a family." Katherine nodded, contentment washing over her despite her physical exhaustion. "A family," she repeated softly. "That's all I ever wanted." "It's all any of us want," Fletcher agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Rest now. I'll be right here if you or James need anything." As Katherine drifted toward sleep, her new son breathing peacefully beside her and her fiancé keeping watch over them both, she marveled at the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had stood on a muddy street in Miles City, evicted and alone, with nowhere to go and no hope for the future. Now she had a home, a family, and a love that promised to sustain her through whatever challenges lay ahead. Her last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was one of profound gratitude for Fletcher's kindness that day in town, for his patience as they found their way to each other, and for the second chance at happiness that had come to them both when they least expected it. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning, 6 weeks after James's birth. Katherine wore a simple ivory dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, with baby James cradled in one arm and William standing proudly at her side as she and Fletcher exchanged vows before the minister from Miles City. The ceremony was small, just the ranch hands, a few neighboring families, and Dr. Peterson, who had become a friend during his visits to check on Katherine and the baby. Thomas Higgins was conspicuously absent, though rumors had reached them that the bank agent had been reassigned to another territory after some questionable dealings came to light. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, beaming at the couple. "Mr. Sheridan, you may kiss your bride." Fletcher's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, mindful of the baby between them but leaving no doubt about his feelings for his new wife. The small gathering erupted in cheers and applause, with Hank and Tobias whistling enthusiastically, until Mrs. Henderson shushed them with a glare. The celebration continued with a feast prepared by Katherine and the women of neighboring ranches, with dancing in the yard to fiddle music provided by Mr. Henderson and his sons. As evening approached, Fletcher found Katherine sitting on the porch, watching William show off his roping skills to admiring guests. "Happy, Mrs. Sheridan?" he asked, settling beside her and placing an arm around her shoulders. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still catch myself thinking someone is calling for another woman when I hear that name," Fletcher chuckled. "You'll get used to it." His expression grew more serious. "I have a wedding gift for you. 2, actually." "Fletcher, you didn't need to. The first is this," he interrupted, reaching into his coat and withdrawing an official-looking document. "Adoption papers for James. If you agree, I'd like to legally make him my son." Katherine's eyes filled with tears as she took the papers, reading the formal language that would give her son Fletcher's name and all the rights of a natural-born child. "Of course I agree," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I can think of no greater gift for James than to have you as his father in every way that matters." Fletcher's smile was radiant. "Thank you. I already love him as my own." He glanced toward the barn, where Tobias was saddling a horse. "The second gift is less serious, but I hope you'll like it just as much." Katherine followed his gaze, surprised to see Tobias leading a beautiful chestnut mare toward them. The horse was smaller than Fletcher's mount but still impressive, with intelligent eyes and a sleek coat that gleamed in the late afternoon sun. "She's yours," Fletcher said, helping Katherine to her feet and guiding her toward the animal. "Her name is Penny, for her copper color. She's gentle but spirited, reminded me of you the moment I saw her." Katherine approached the mare cautiously, allowing the horse to sniff her outstretched hand before stroking the velvety nose. "She's beautiful, Fletcher, but it's been years since I've ridden regularly." "You'll remember," he assured her. "And when James is a bit older, you can ride together. Every rancher's wife needs her own horse." The thoughtfulness of both gifts moved Katherine deeply. Fletcher had given her not just a home and his name, but a true place in his world as a mother to both their boys, as his partner on the ranch, as a woman with her own independence and mobility. "I love you," she said simply, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "And I love you," he replied, his arms encircling her waist. "More than I can say." That night, after the guests had departed and the boys were asleep, Fletcher and Katherine finally had their first moments alone as husband and wife. The bedroom that had once been Sarah's, then Katherine's, was now theirs together, a symbol of the new life they were building on the foundation of their separate pasts. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Fletcher said as they lay together in the darkness, his fingers tracing the curve of Katherine's hip. "After Sarah died, I believed that part of my life was over, that William and the ranch would be enough." Katherine rested her head on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "I felt the same after James died, especially when I learned I was carrying his child. I thought my future was set. I would be a widow raising a fatherless child, always defined by what I had lost. And now," Fletcher's hand moved to stroke her hair, the gentle caress soothing and arousing at the same time. "Now I'm your wife," Katherine said, lifting her face to his. "Mother to 2 beautiful boys, mistress of the Lazy S Ranch, and happier than I ever imagined possible." Fletcher's kiss was tender at first, then increasingly passionate as the barriers of restraint that had defined their relationship fell away. They came together as husband and wife with a hunger born of long waiting, discovering each other with joy and reverence until they lay spent and satisfied in each other's arms. "Worth waiting for," Fletcher murmured against her hair as they drifted toward sleep. "Just like everything else about you, Katherine Sheridan." The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of ordinary moments and milestone events. James grew from a newborn to a crawling, babbling infant with Fletcher's blue eyes and Katherine's auburn hair. William thrived under the combined attention of 2 parents, excelling in school and developing a remarkable gift for working with horses that Tobias encouraged and Fletcher proudly supported. The ranch prospered as well, with cattle prices rebounding and a new contract to supply horses to the Army providing additional income. Katherine proved to have a talent for bookkeeping, bringing order to Fletcher's haphazard records and identifying areas where they could increase efficiency and profits. "We should be able to pay off the mortgage within 2 years at this rate," she told Fletcher one evening as they reviewed the quarterly accounts. "Sooner if the new breeding stock produces as well as we hope." Fletcher looked up from the papers with a mixture of pride and amusement. "I should have married a Boston girl years ago. You have a better head for business than I do." "Not better," Katherine corrected, "just different. You understand cattle and land and men. I understand numbers and planning. Together we make a good team." "The best," Fletcher agreed, pulling her onto his lap despite her laughing protests about the impropriety. "And speaking of teams, I've been thinking about expanding ours." Katherine raised an eyebrow. "Another ranch hand. Hank mentioned his nephew is looking for work." "Not exactly," Fletcher said, his hand coming to rest on her abdomen. "I was thinking more along the lines of another child, if you're ready, that is." The suggestion caught Katherine by surprise, though not unpleasantly. James had recently celebrated his first birthday, and she had occasionally found herself wondering what it would be like to have another baby one conceived in love with her husband. "I'd like that," she said softly, touching his cheek. "Very much." Fletcher's smile was tender as he drew her down for a kiss. "Then perhaps we should start practicing right away, just to be sure we remember how it's done." Katherine laughed against his lips. "For the sake of thoroughness, I suppose we must." 3 months later, Katherine's suspicions were confirmed by Dr. Peterson during his regular visit to check on the health of the ranch families in the area. "Congratulations, Mrs. Sheridan," the doctor said with a smile. "You're expecting again. I'd say the baby will arrive in early spring." Fletcher's joy at the news was matched by William's excitement at the prospect of another sibling. James, too young to understand, simply continued his determined efforts to explore every inch of the ranch house on newly stable legs, blissfully unaware that his position as the baby of the family would soon be usurped. As Christmas approached, bringing with it the first heavy snows of winter, Katherine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. 2 years ago, she had been a different woman, uncertain, dependent on James, content with a smaller life. Now she was co-mistress of a thriving ranch, mother to 2 children with another on the way, and partner to a man who valued her mind as much as her heart. The changes in Fletcher were equally profound. The reserved, solitary rancher who had hired her out of a mixture of necessity and compassion had become a more demonstrative father to William, a loving husband to Katherine, and an eager parent to James. He smiled more, laughed more, and spoke more freely of his feelings and hopes for the future. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire watching William show James how to play with his new wooden horse, Fletcher took Katherine's hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band that had joined his mother's ring on her finger. "You ever think about that day in Miles City?" he asked quietly. "When we first met," Katherine nodded, leaning against his shoulder. "Often. It was the worst day of my life and the best, though I didn't know it then." "I almost didn't stop," Fletcher admitted. "I saw you sitting there looking so lost, and I rode past at first. Told myself it wasn't my business, that whatever trouble you were in wasn't my concern." "What made you turn back?" Katherine asked, curious about this detail he had never shared before. Fletcher's eyes held hers, the firelight reflecting in their blue depths. "Something my father told me before I left Pennsylvania. He said, 'Fletcher, sometimes God puts people in your path for a reason. Pay attention when he does. When I saw you there, something told me you were one of those people, that if I rode away, I'd regret it for the rest of my life.'" Katherine squeezed his hand, her heart full. "I'm glad you listened to that voice." "So am I," Fletcher replied, brushing a kiss against her temple. "Every single day." As they sat together watching their children play, the snow falling softly outside and the promise of spring's new life growing within her, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home. Not in the streets of Boston where she was born, nor in the small house in Miles City where she had tried to build a life with James, but here on the Lazy S Ranch with Fletcher and their blended family. The path that had led her here had been winding and often painful, but every step had been necessary. Even the darkest moments, James's death, the eviction, learning of his betrayal, had ultimately guided her to this happiness she now cherished. As if reading her thoughts, Fletcher pressed another kiss to her hair and whispered, "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Sheridan. Here's to many more." "Many, many more," Katherine agreed, turning to meet his lips with hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future. A future that had begun on that fateful day when a widow with nowhere to go had met a cowboy who believed his ranch needed a woman's touch.